regarding a report on the condition of the Sullivan Courthouse. This was pulled by Councilor Zondervan. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, there's been a lot of rumors swirling around about the safety of this building. And it's my opinion that if the building is not safe, it should be torn down immediately. And if it's safe, then we shouldn't worry about it that much. We also received a communication from Representative Conley this afternoon detailing notes from his meetings with DCAM, which is the state agency that's responsible for the building. So I just want to make sure that my colleagues are aware of that communication as well, because it provides a lot of facts that hopefully inform this discussion. So I appreciate the report, and I would just like to ask some questions about it. So starting with the policy order that led to this response, it states that preliminary reports indicate the presence of standing water in the courthouse basement and that asbestos is condensing in that water. So my question is, because the response didn't quite answer that question, is there any possibility that this water is contaminated with asbestos?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I too have been in contact with representatives of DCAM, Division of Capital Asset Management and Maintenance. Our understanding is that there is a large accumulation of water in the basement of the building. This is as a result of 2 or 3 separate incidents over the past few years where water pipes froze and ruptured in the building because of lack of heat in the building. My understanding as of my most recent conversations with DCAM is that the water in the basement has not been tested, or let me rephrase that, has not shown a presence of asbestos. The building was built in 1971. In 1971, asbestos was widely used as fire insulation and fire protection for steel structural members. So there is definitely asbestos in the building. It's somewhat similar to the fact that any type of painting that was done prior to 1975, the paint contained lead. We don't know if the water is contaminated. I don't feel that it probably is contaminated because the asbestos, where asbestos would have been utilized in the construction of the building, it probably is not in relationship to ruptured pipes, things of that nature.
Thank you. So it's your belief that there probably is not asbestos in the water, but we don't know for sure.
I would say that's a fair characterization, yes.
Thank you. So next, the policy order states that previous water remediation measures at the courthouse led to flooding in a butter's basement. So are you aware of any previous water remediation measures at the courthouse that has led to flooding in a butter's basements?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, I am not.
Okay, so we don't think that that's what actually happened.
I don't think that the issue of water in the basement of the building has any impact on flooding in the neighborhood.
Okay, so our understanding is that the water in the basement of the building is contained within that basement and has not leaked out of the building.
Yes, sir. That is my understanding as well.
Okay, thank you.
Because if the water was leaking out, the amount of water in the basement of the building would have decreased significantly by now. And my understanding is it has not.
Okay. And I believe DCAM is planning to remove that water with trucks. And okay. So next, it stated that the building lacks basic safety infrastructure like sprinklers, power, and pipes, and that pieces of the exterior and windows regularly break and fall off the building. So with regards to the sprinklers, power, and pipes, we agree that the building is not currently being powered.
Correct. There is no heat in the building, there is no electricity in the building, and the fire protection systems have been disabled because of no power. There was an issue several months ago where there was a generator running that caused some consternation in the neighborhood. The generator was at a point where it was beyond repair, so when the generator failed, that was the end of the temporary power to the building.
So should we have any concerns about the safety of the building if the fire suppression systems are not functional?
My approach to the condition of this building right now is that this building is basically an empty concrete box. It is built of fire-resistant construction, and there is no life safety issue in the building because the building is not occupied. There is no power, as I said, there's no heat. The building has been secured. There's 24/7 security watching the site. Absent somebody going in and doing something nefarious to start a fire, I don't see a fire breaking out in that building.
Okay, thank you. And then next it said pieces of the exterior and windows regularly break and fall off the building. Are we aware of any of that happening?
I am not aware of anything of that nature happening regularly. I understand that there was possibly some glass failure when we had the incident with the steam pipe back around the end of May. That's the only time I was, in my tenure as acting chief of the fire department, that's the only time I've been made aware of anything possibly falling from the building.
Thank you. And so then it asked to work with the Cambridge Fire Department and DCAM to conduct a safety check with special concern for the presence of flammable materials and report on the safety status of both the interior and exterior of the Sullivan Courthouse. Now, in your response, you said that it was not recommended to do a safety check?
That is correct. I would not. I instructed the personnel of the Cambridge Fire Department several months ago that nobody was to go in the building for any response of any kind without full protective clothing, including respiratory protection. Now, I would say, based on the fact that there have been water leaks in the building and the building is sealed up, there is probably a preponderance of mold in the building. Okay? There is, in my opinion, no need or benefit of personnel from the fire department going in to examine that building because, as I stated earlier, there is no life safety issue. It's not an occupied building. You know, structural engineers, something like that's one thing, but there would be nothing garnered by fire personnel going in and walking through the building. We basically know what's in there. It is an empty, abandoned concrete building, fire-resistant construction.
Thank you. There was a letter to the editor that was published that claimed that the building is exposing our neighbors to dangerous cancer-causing toxins. Do you have any concerns that that's happening?
I do not have any concern that the building is exposing people to cancer-causing toxins. And I received a phone call one day last week from somebody asking me about this, and I said, you know, the course of action, if somebody feels that something like this is going on, is that they need to have testing conducted by a recognized testing laboratory. The question that was raised to me was about contaminated water in the basements of surrounding residential properties, and I said, Well, you can't say it's contaminated unless it's been tested. If it's been tested and it comes up contaminated, then we deal with that issue, but
Thank you. That letter also claimed that there was no routine maintenance to keep the building structurally safe and sound. Is there any concern that the building is not structurally sound or that it requires ongoing maintenance?
in my opinion, the building's structurally sound.
There was also a claim that the burst steam pipe may have sent aerosolized asbestos particles into the neighborhood.
That question was raised to me in the same phone conversation as I told the gentleman on the phone. I find that highly unlikely because the presence of asbestos, where asbestos would have been placed in that building during construction, the failure of a steam pipe probably would have little to no interaction with asbestos.
Thank you. And we've already discussed the water seeping into the basement. So those are my questions. I encourage my colleagues to read the memo from Representative Connolly as well, which details DCAM's position on this building. But based on all the information that we have available to us, it doesn't sound to me that this building is a safety hazard to anyone except potentially people going into the building because of the mold issue that you brought up.
I would concur with that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Toomey?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through the Chief, I respect your opinion. I really don't find it very reassuring to a lot of direct abutters in this location. And we all know there's strong feelings on both sides of the issue on the future development of this site. But certainly for the current condition, to have either DCAM and with Cambridge Public Safety, no one's been in that building, so no one knows exactly what the extent of the asbestos or the mold and the contamination. Residents there, about 2 months ago, the water did come out of that building and went into, I believe, some of their basements. The asbestos, that is a very serious issue. There's a resident that lives 20 feet from there, has a set of twins, 3 months old and a 3-year-old. I'm not sure how reassured that family is going to be listening that, well, no one's been in the building, so we're not 100% sure. And I know it's not your responsibility, and DCAM certainly, we've seen over the years the lack of response, but at some point, someone has to go into that building with the protective gear to get an exact assessment of the conditions in that building. These are young kids that are living in 20 feet from this building. To me, I'm sure it's not reassuring to them. And I will have, I believe you responded to one of the emails that I sent you, and I believe she said there were some windows that were broken and some pieces fallen and all that. But to me, the asbestos and the mold and the condition of that water, to me, has to be addressed hopefully by both DCAM and the Cambridge Public Safety to get people an honest answer of exactly what is in that building and how we proceed. And I know it's a very contentious, we all know it's a very contentious issue, but the health hazard to me is paramount right now before anything can take place.
Councilor Mellon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I'm curious, the last email I have from you, Chief Reardon, is that, Mahoney, sorry, is that DCAM was waiting for the Department of Environmental Protection to get various approvals to go in and actually test the water. I know that this isn't your area, but do you have any idea with your conversations with DCAM if they have gotten those approvals? I know that this is, as Councilor Toomey said, this is a really big concern for residents who live across the street. I'm curious if they have gotten those approvals.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in my last conversation with, my last contact with the gentleman I deal with at DCAM, He did state that they have made a significant amount of progress with respect to dealing with the environmental folks. They are working with Department of Environmental Protection, and they expect that they will be able to make some progress within the next few weeks, is what they told me.
Okay, thank you. And it's my understanding, I've had work done in my own basement where we have a couple of pipes that were lined with asbestos, that's typically where the asbestos is found. Would there not be asbestos insulating steam pipes? Does anybody know the answer to that question? The city manager or deputy city manager?
There is a possibility, but I actually would have expected that there would have been some asbestos remediation with respect to piping prior to the courthouse being vacated in 2014. The asbestos that is surrounding the structural steel that is in void spaces and so forth, I would expect is still intact or still in that location. I cannot answer for certain if the asbestos surrounding heating plant piping and so forth had been removed, but I would suspect that prior to that building being vacated in 2014, it probably would have been abated.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to the Chief. Thank you for providing that information. I think that that's probably where a lot of the concern lies for the residents that directly abut it, is where the asbestos is. Would it be impacted by a steam rupture? And does it then go off into the air and then into their basements in terms of the flooding? Because as Councillor Toomey mentioned, this wasn't the first instance of flooding, and it was not the abutters across the street were impacted and had water in their basement. I think it's important for everyone to know just exactly what's going on. If I was a homeowner who lived across the street and I had water in my basement, I'd want to know if it was impacted. I had a guy from Eversource come to my basement and see that I had asbestos around 2 pipes. He wouldn't even enter the basement. And I know that your firefighters have a difficult job when they think that there's a fire and it's a really, really hot day and they can't go above the 15th floor because it's 116 degrees. I also just wanted to speak quickly to the assertion earlier that windows haven't been falling out. I would beg to differ. We have abutters who live directly across the street, who work from home, who listen to that crash on a constant basis and on a regular basis. So I don't want to get into a big, as Councillor Toomey mentioned, this is a very contentious issue. I do appreciate the report coming back and answering some of these questions. I do really want to say that I have the abutters' safety concerns in mind, and we have a number of exchanges where we were talking about the lights and the FAA, whether or not they are aware, and I understand now they are aware that there are no lights on the top of the building. That's a resident concern if you live across the street. So I think our job is to handle resident concerns and do that constituent services and make sure that those residents feel safe and that they feel that their city councilor is taking their safety concerns seriously. So thank you for returning this report. I have no further questions. I'll yield the floor.
Pleasure of the council. A couple things from me before I go back. So I'm with Councillor Toomey on this one in terms of, we know, as you said, Chief Mahoney, that we know there's asbestos in the building. It's going to cost tens of millions of dollars to remediate it, and you're probably right, given your experience. But I do understand residents who are concerned when all we can say are things like, we feel that this isn't the case, or we assume that this isn't the case. That's not terribly comforting to me. We do know now. The water that leaked into people, that flooded people's basements. Maybe that wasn't contaminated, but I'm curious as to that probably costs people some money, right, to clean that up in their basement, let alone any items they lost or anything else. I don't know, Councilor Zondervan shaking his head. I guess people cleaned it up for free. There are other things, so I'm just, I don't, that's certainly an inconvenience at best and a cost of money to people if that building is flooding and whatnot. So I think, and, with respect to Representative Connolly and his notes on this meeting, there have been I've been in a lot of meetings where I have interpreted things one way, and then other people have interpreted them differently. I would like to see something from DCAM if they're saying that if everything that is in Representative Connolly's email is what DCAM actually said. I'd like to see DCAM actually state that. I know that other statements were made about what DCAM said, and when I called DCAM myself, they said we never said that. I don't know who's not telling the truth, but I would like to see something from DCAM on record. There have been other times in other state departments, when there's an issue on Memorial Drive and we have trouble getting DCR to do things, sometimes the city steps in and says, well, we're going to do it ourselves because it's causing a problem for our residents. So it is DCAM's responsibility to make sure that building is safe. They have been negligent, I think, in a lot of their responsibilities around this building. And so, but waiting, that doesn't mean that we should then say, well, we're not going to go in and check it because it's not our building. We ultimately have a responsibility to our residents that DCAM should have but doesn't seem to have. So if we can go in and just ensure people, so we're not saying things like, I feel that, and I expect that, but really we can say, we tested the water, it's okay. You don't have anything to worry about. I would suggest we do that. So, Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With regards to Representative Connolly's notes, he has represented that those notes were reviewed by DCAM before he distributed them to us. So unless we want to call Representative Connolly a liar, we can take it at his word that these notes do accurately represent DCAM's position. And those notes include statements such as the former Edward Sullivan Courthouse does not pose a threat to public health and does not pose a risk to the environment. It's not accurate to suggest that the courthouse is exposing our neighbors to dangerous cancer-causing toxins, as some have claimed. The courthouse is not actively posing a risk to anybody, according to DCAM. They maintain 24/7 security on site. They're in regular contact with Cambridge's fire department, and they also communicate with other city departments. With regards to the beacons on the buildings, it states, while it's true that the flashing beacons on the roof of the courthouse are no longer operating, the building poses no particular risk to aircraft. The beacons were more important in the past when there were not tall buildings in the area, but now with so many taller buildings in Cambridge Crossing, East Cambridge, and Kendall Square, the operation of the beacons on the courthouse seems to be less relevant, and the FAA and surrounding airfields have been advised of the status of the building. The building does not pose a flight risk, according to DCAM. It also states that it's not accurate to suggest that pieces of the exterior and windows regularly break and fall off the building. So, again, based on statements by our chief, I heard him say that it doesn't make sense to send our personnel into the building to go test these assertions. DCAM is working on testing the water in the basement. With regards to flooding in abutters' basements, that can't be coming from the building because otherwise the water levels in the building would have dropped substantially. So there's flooding happening in basements in Cambridge all the time. That doesn't automatically mean it has anything to do with that building, and it's understandable that residents are concerned and that they are drawing those conclusions. But it's incumbent on us to make sure that we verify those concerns to the best of our ability, and also that we don't amplify those concerns and spread unnecessary fear. So from what I've heard tonight and what I've heard from Representative Connolly and through him from DCAM, I don't think that we should be telling our residents that this building is a safety hazard. Thank you.
Mr. Manager?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would just want to clear one thing. I have made it clear that I am recommending on this building that we need to do something. Whether or not the asbestos is there, the water is there, the fact of the matter is, I believe if you're a resident of East Cambridge and you live near that courthouse, we need to do a better job than what's going on right now. And I don't think we can dispute what the condition is, but the reality is that building should not be left that way for this amount of time. And I've sent my letter to the planning board. I know this is coming on the council, but I just have to say where I stand is it's time to do something. As someone who grew up in that neighborhood, I just don't think the residents around that building are being treated properly with that building in the condition it's in, rightfully or wrongfully, and I just feel I have to say that.
Thank you. And I will say, Councilor Zondervan, if I am not calling Representative Connolly a liar, if I wanted to do that, I'd do that. But what I am saying, and that's, maybe that's a nice quip, but what I am saying is that I want verification of things because people's safety is important. And what I think is unfortunate is that as this is a very contentious conversation about what's going to happen to that courthouse, that people would somehow say, well, let's say that, I'm going to believe that the building's fine because then that negates people's argument that the building needs to come down. Let's not use politics in this. I want to make sure it's safe. And I would think we all would want to make sure it's safe. So I'm going to end on that. So the question comes on placing, do you want to comment? Councilor Carlin.
I won't ask the question directly because it's obvious. Who's owned the building for 10 years? Who's responsible for the condition of the building? It's not the city. It's not the developer. It's one entity. That's who's responsible for. If there is a condition, that's the group that's responsible.
Yeah.
And no matter what happens when we meet in September, they're still responsible.
Question comes on placing the map. Councilor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am not calling Representative Connolly a liar or saying he's not a liar. I'm not able to judge that, but there is no way a multi-story empty building in an environment like Cambridge with heat and cold constantly expanding and contracting things is a long-term good thing. Maybe now it's not a safety hazard. Over time, the windows will get loose, things will fall off, and when something falls from a 20-story building, it hurts whoever's down below if it hits them. So, sure, it's not an immediate safety hazard. I don't know that anyone's claiming it's a dramatic immediate safety hazard, but certainly long-term or maybe even medium-term, this is going to become a much more dangerous item, I believe. And we've seen multiple structural failures or at least systems failures, not structural failures, in that building already. So I get the sense that some people would like to have it sit there. And sitting there for any period of time, I think would be a very irresponsible thing from a safety perspective.
Question comes on Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to clarify that personally, I would like to see the building torn down yesterday. I just want to make sure that we're not scaring our residents unnecessarily. If we think there's a safety hazard, we should take down the building. If we don't think that's a problem, then we shouldn't use that as a reason to do one thing or another. Thank you.
And there are multiple ways that residents can get scared, right? So someone saying that, there's not a concern there, again, there are some people who live there that aren't satisfied with assumptions being made. They want some things tested, and I'm not going to tell them they shouldn't be scared because DCAM says it's safe when DCAM's record isn't exactly stellar when it comes to this building. I'm not sure why I would believe them, actually. And so we should do our due diligence. Councilor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. How someone can so blatantly say that we should just tear down the building, I just don't understand. This is a massive building, we build on it. Tearing it down is not something one does lightly, so I am confused by that stance.
All right, well, let's move on because that's not what's in the report. So on placing the matter on file, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The matter is placed on file. We move to city